Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something, well, truly essential but also famously confusing. We're mapping the Sola sound tone bender lineage.
Yes. This is probably the most important family of fuzz circuits ever out of London, and maybe the one that causes the most headaches for collectors and tone chasers.
Absolutely. It's less a neat family tree and more like a tangled hedge maze. Circuits, parts, brands, it's a lot. But our mission today is simple. Give you the shortcut.
And you really need that shortcut. Because understanding this lineage is key to unlocking the sound of so much classic late 60s, early 70s UK rock. Think Jeff Beck, think Jimmy Page. They're iconic fuzz tones. They're rooted right here.
That's the plan. We're cutting through the noise, the different enclosures, the transistor types, all of it. We've looked at the schematics, the history, and the core story really follows 5 main circuit versions.
That's right. You've got the MKI, the MK1.5, the MK2, the MK3, and finally the MK3. Understanding that progression, the circuit evolution itself, is the key.
Because often the name on the pedal doesn't tell the whole story, does it?
Not at all. Sola Sound, who designed these, quickly became a major OEM supplier. That means original equipment manufacturer. They were building these circuits for huge names like Vox, Marshall, Rotosound.
So the same guts could be inside totally different looking boxes.
Exactly. It's why focusing on the circuit, the MK number, is the only reliable way through this history.
Okay, let's dive in then. Starting right at the beginning. London, 1965. The birth of British fuzz, really.
1965, a pivotal year. In the US, you had the Maestro FZ1 fuzz, but players in the UK, they wanted something. More aggression, more saturation.
Yeah, the FC1 was maybe a bit polite for the emerging sound over there.
You could say that. So this is where Gary Hurst, the engineer, teams up with the Macari family who ran Sola Sound, and together they create the tone bender MKI.
And this wasn't just another fuzz. This was actually the first fuzz pedal commercially sold in the UK.
That's right. A landmark moment. And technically, it's crucial to understand what it was. The schematics clearly show a 3-transistor germanium design.
3 germaniums. And the goal wasn't just to copy the FC1, right?
No, definitely not. The sources are pretty clear they wanted it hotter. They wanted, quote, more sustain. So it's like an FZ1 pushed way harder.
How did they achieve that? Just different transistors or?
It's more about how they bias those transistors. They use parts like new market NKT213s or other OC series germaniums, often obscure ones, and push them really hard. This configuration, sort of a cascade of gain stages, just creates massive saturation.
And that intense saturation and biasing that leads to a specific sound, doesn't it? People call it spitty.
Exactly. Spitty is the word you hear all the time. What happens is those heavily biased germanium transistors clip really sharply. It creates these high-frequency artifacts, almost a sizzle, and the note attack decays really fast, almost like it's sputtering.
So it's not smooth sustained, it's more aggressive.
Very aggressive. Thick, super compressed, and kind of unstable in a really cool way. That's the sound of mid-65 London fuzz.
And you can even see the demand and how the pedal itself changed, right? The first ones were pretty rough.
Oh yeah, the very earliest MKS were apparently quite crude, hand-wired into simple cast aluminum boxes. But the demand was instant. They had to quickly standardize, moving to those folded steel enclosures that people now associate with early Sola sound.
That quick change itself tells you how fast this whole effects thing was taking off.
Absolutely. And that sound, that compressed, spitty MKI sound, it just defined the Tone Bender brand right from the start. And you have to mention the artist connection.
Jeff Beck, right, with the Yardbirds.
Definitely. Beck's playing in that era, especially with the Yardbirds, is just synonymous with that thick germanium Wallace sound.
Wow.
He really established that as the British fuzz tone.
So the MKI sets the stage. Dense, aggressive, foundational. But it had a downside, you mentioned.
Well, yeah. Complexity and cost. Getting 3 good matched germanium transistors in 1965 wasn't cheap, and wiring them up reliably took time.
Which naturally leads to the next step in the evolution. Economics often drive design, don't they?
Always. And that brings us to early 1966 and the arrival of the Tone Bender MK1.5. This is where things get really interesting and also where a lot of the confusion starts.
Okay, the MK1.5, what was the big change here?
Simplification. It was all about making it cheaper and easier to build. They redesigned it as a 2-transistor circuit.
Down from 3 to 2.
Exactly. That cuts down the parts cost significantly, and it makes the assembly much simpler and faster compared to biasing 3 transistors correctly, like in the MKI.
Makes sense from a production standpoint. But the really huge thing about the 1.5, this is the one with the massive historical connection, right?
This is absolutely critical. If there's one connection you need to grasp for the whole history of fuzz, it's this. The two-transistor, two-knob circuit of the tonebender MK1.5 is the direct ancestor of the Dallas Arbiter fuzz face.
Wow. So the fuzz face essentially starts here.
It really does. That classic simple two-transistor fuzz topology. It was standardized right here by Sola Sound with the MK1.5. You just can't overstate its importance.
And losing that third transistor, that must have changed the sound quite a bit from the MKI.
Or absolutely. You lose that extra gain stage, that heavy compression. The MK1.5 sounds much more open. It's raw, it's ripping, less spitty, more of a gritty bark.
And it has that other characteristic people talk about, something about being gated.
Right, the gated edge. Germanium transistors are fussy. They need very specific voltages, the bias point, to work right. With just two transistors, if the voltage drops even slightly or the bias isn't perfect, the circuit can kind of choke off the signal abruptly as it decays.
It's like the sound just cuts off sharply.
Yeah, almost like a dying battery effect. It sounds choppy, gated. And funnily enough, that became a really desirable sound for certain players wanting an aggressive, cutting tone.
Interesting how limitations can become features. So Sola Sound has this simpler, cheaper, raw-sounding circuit, and they realized they're onto something.
Precisely. They knew they had a winner, effective, easy to build, sounded great. So what did they do? They immediately started OEMing it, building it for other companies.
So this is where the brand confusion really kicks into high gear.
This is ground zero for it. Because suddenly, this exact same two-transistor circuit starts appearing under different names. You find surviving examples with the Sola Sound badge, sure, but also early Vox units.
Vox used this circuit too. Weren't they making their own fuzzes?
They were, but Sola supplied them too. You see British-made Vox units with this circuit and also Italian-made ones. Then there's Roto Sound, even obscure brands like Impex, all using the MK1.5 guts.
Wow, so you could buy essentially the same pedal from multiple brands.
You could. And we even know some component specifics like the Roto Sound branded MK1.5s often use Mullard OC75 transistor pairs. Finding those OC75s inside tells you it's that 1.5 circuit. Even if the box says Roto Sound, the DNA is the same.
So the MK1.5 is crucial. It's the economic bridge, the fuzz face ancestor, and the start of the OEM boom.
Exactly. It proved a simpler fuzz could still be powerful and, importantly, profitable to mass produce.
But players always want more, right? That simplified circuit maybe didn't have the sheer oomph or sustain of the original MKI.
That's the thing. Session players, the big names, they still missed that huge volume. And crucially, that singing sustained the MKI offered, even if it was expensive. So if the 1.5 was simplification, the very next step was about bringing back the power.
Which takes us to late 1966, and maybe the most iconic version, the MK2 Professional.
The MK2, yes. This is the one. This is when the tone bender truly becomes the dominant voice of British heavy rock. Sola Sound basically looked at the successful 1.5 core, that two-transistor fuzz face foundation, and thought, okay, how do we get the MKI's volume and sustain back, but keep it stable?
And the solution was elegant.
Brilliantly simple, really. They just added a third gain stage back in, but they put it in front of the two-transistor 1.5 circuit.
So not quite like the MKI's 3 stages cascaded.
Different topology.
Yeah.
This first stage in the MK cullet acts like a preamp or a buffer.
Yeah.
It hits that core two-transistor fuzz circuit much harder than a guitar signal alone ever could.
So it drives the main fuzz section harder.
Exactly. It boosts the input sensitivity, gives you way more volume without just adding noise, and it lets that two-transistor fuzz core sustain much, much longer before it clips out.
And the sound. This is the sound for many people.
This is the world-famous one. It's thicker than the 1.5, much louder, and it's known for that incredible liquid sustain, that archetypal singing UK fuzz lead tone. That's very often in MK2. It just cuts through those heavy late 60s rhythm sections.
We need the artist links here. Who are we talking about?
This is prime Jimmy Page territory. He used it heavily in the later Yardbirds and famously on the first couple of Led Zeppelin albums. Think Whole Lotta Love solo sustain.
Okay, classic Page. Anyone else?
Donovan, actually. The sound on Hurdy Gurdy Man, that textured, beautiful, long decay, that's a signature MK2 second sound too.
Yeah.
Shows its versatility.
And physically, how do you spot an MK2? There's a key visual cue, isn't there?
The housing, the classic sandcast aluminum enclosure. It has that rough, textured feel. And crucially, it usually has the professional MK2 screen printed right on it. See that combo? You're looking at a late 66 to 68 MK2.
Sandcast case, professional MK2. Got it. What about inside? Any important component
Oh
variations?
yeah, collectors go nuts for this stuff.
Huh.
Most MK2s use Mullard OC75 germanium transistors, solid, classic choice. But the sources mention rarer runs use OC81D transistors, often as the driver transistor.
And the OC81Ds make a
They
difference.
generally have higher gain. So pedals with OC81Ds tend to sound a bit more intense, maybe sustain even longer. That's why they're particularly sought after.
Okay, so the MK2 is this legendary sustainer and its success. This is where that OEM business really explodes. Sola Sound becomes the fuzz supplier.
Absolutely. You have to ask, why would giants like Marshall and Vox need Sola Sound to build fuzz pedals for them?
Good question. They had plenty of engineers, right?
They did. But Sola Sound had specifically mastered building these tricky germanium circuits reliably and at scale, especially the 3-transistor MK2. Getting consistent results with germanium is hard. Sola had cracked it. That expertise was gold.
So they built the exact MKTZ circuit for other brands.
Yes, the sources confirm it. Sola supplied the MK2 circuit to Vox, who sold it as the Vox Tone Bender Professional MK2, often in the same sandcast shell.
Okay, Vox. Who else?
Marshall, their famous Superfuzz. The early ones from 66 onwards were Sola supplied MK2, same circuit, Marshall badge, and Rotosound got them too.
That's incredible. The same core circuit available under, what, 4 different brand names?
At least. It just shows Sola Sound's strategy wasn't just about their own brand. It was about being the engine room for the entire UK effects market in 67. The MKT circuit was the hottest thing going.
It's a fascinating business model. Be the indispensable supplier.
Okay, so we've had the MKI Genesis, the 1.5 simplification, and the MKTC6 sustained monster. What happens next? By 1968, music's changing again, right? Heavier sounds, more experimentation? Exactly. The MK2, while iconic, had a fixed sound. Its EQ was baked in. As music got heavier and more complex, players started wanting more control, more flexibility to shape their fuzz tone.
Which naturally leads to more knobs.
Precisely. Enter the MK Third around 1968. This marks the shift towards versatility. They kept the basic 3-transistor germanium setup, but the big news was the addition of a tone control.
Ah, the first 3-knob tone bender. Fuzz, level, and now tone.
That's the layout.
Yeah.
And importantly, these generally still use germanium transistors, so you kept that core character, but now you could actually shape it.
How did that tone control change things sonically?
It made a huge difference. The MK2 often had a strong mid-range push to help it cut through. The MK3's tone control, usually a simple low-pass filter, let you dial back the treble harshness or smooth out the mids, or even make it sound darker and thicker. Much more sculptable.
More flexible for different amps and guitars, too, I imagine.
Definitely, but this is also where the naming gets even more confusing. The MK3 label itself becomes a mess.
Also,
Because Sola Sound was making their standard germanium MK3 and their usual enclosure. But at the same time, Vox had their own distinct pedal. They called the Vox Tone Bender Mark III. It usually came in a different slanted gray enclosure.
so 2 different pedals, both called Mark III, around the same time.
Pretty much. The Vox version was conceptually similar, 3 knobs, trying to achieve similar goals, but the overlapping names and different looks cause endless confusion for collectors even today.
So the lesson is, again, don't just trust the number. Look at the case. Look inside if you can.
Exactly. You have to connect the circuit, the case style, and the era.
Okay, so the MK3 introduces the tone knob. What about the MK4? Is that another big circuit change?
Less of a circuit change, more of an architectural one. Around 1970, Sola Sound essentially took the 3-knob MK3 circuit and put it into a new standard enclosure. This was the pressed steel case.
Moving away from the heavy sandcast ones.
Right. Cheaper and easier to manufacture consistently. These pedals often had Mark IV printed on them, different graphics. But inside, it was largely the same 3-knob germanium circuit as the later MK3.
So the MK4 is basically the MK3 circuit in a new suit.
Pretty much. But that pressed steel enclosure is significant because it becomes the standard Sola Sound, color sound house style for the early 70s, that familiar angled metal box. That design language starts here with the MK4.
And that 3-knob circuit in that box underpins other pedals later on, too.
Yes, definitely. You see this exact topology 3-knob bender in a pressed steel case appearing in early 70s Park pedals and many early color sound units. It's the final evolution of the original germanium tone bender line before things take a sharp turn.
Okay, this feels like a good point to really solidify the OEM stuff. We've mentioned Vox, Marshall, Rotosound. Let's quickly recap who got what and maybe some spotting tips.
Good idea. It reinforces why circuit knowledge is key. Why did Marshall need Sola? Expertise and probably access to reliable germanium transistors, which were getting trickier to source consistently. Sola had the pipeline.
Right. So Vox, they used both the MK1.5 and the MK2.
Correct. Early Vox fuzzes, especially Italian-made ones from around 66, are often the two-transistor MK1.5 circuit. But the later Vox Tone Bender Professional MK2, in the Sandcast case from 67-68, is definitely the Sola-supplied three-transistor MK2. Case and name are your clues there.
Got it. Marshall Superfuzz.
Started life in 66 as a Sola-supplied MK2 in the Sandcast housing, the classic sustaining fuzz. But here's a wrinkle.
Always a wrinkle.
Marshall eventually took over production themselves, likely after the Sola deal ended. And players often say those later, Marshall-built Superfuzz sound a bit different, maybe slightly darker than the Sola ones.
So even within the Superfuzz name, there's variation depending on who actually built it.
Exactly. Adds another layer. Then you have Rotosound. They primarily used the MK1.5 circuit in their early cast metal fuzz boxes, often with those Muller-Dozy 75s we mentioned.
Okay. And Park. You mentioned them using the later circuit.
Right. Park was Marshall's sort of secondary brand in the early mid-70s. Their Park fuzz sound is typically that MK3, MKV-style three-knob bender circuit housed in the standard 70s pressed steel Sola color sound box.
So a later era Bender clone, essentially.
Pretty much. Although, interestingly, there were also two-knob Park fuzzes. Schematics show they basically just took the three-knob circuit and hardwired the fuzz control to maximum, removing that knob. Simplification again.
Always trying to streamline. Okay, so with all these brands, let's give the listener that quick spotting guide again. Rule 1.
If you see that heavy, rough Sandcast enclosure, and especially if it says professional MK2, you're looking at the classic MK2 second circuit from late 66 to 68. Doesn't matter if the badge says Sola, Vox, or Marshall, that case means MK2 family.
Okay, Sandcast MK2 era. Rule 2.
If you see the lighter, smoother, angled pressed steel enclosure with three knobs, probably from the early 70s onwards, you're in the MKIV Color Sound Park family lineage. That sheet metal case is the big giveaway for the final germanium generation.
Case style is king when the name is confusing.
It's often the most reliable first clue.
Right. We've tracked the germanium circuits up to the early 70s MKIV in its pressed steel box. But the story takes another big turn then, doesn't it? Sola Sound makes a major branding shift.
Yeah, things changed significantly in the early 70s. Sola Sound starts moving most of its pedals under a new brand name, Color Sound. The three-knob germanium bender, the MKIV circuit, initially continues under the Color Sound banner.
Okay, so just a rebrand initially. But then something weird happens with the tone bender name itself under Color Sound.
This is where it gets wild and honestly a bit misleading. Around 1973, two new pedals appear. The Color Sound Super Tone Bender, and later the Jumbo Tone Bender. They use the famous name. But they are not tone bender circuits in the traditional sense at all. This is crucial for anyone hunting vintage gear. Despite the name, these are fundamentally different pedals.
Different how? What's inside them?
The schematics don't lie. They are Big Muff family designs. Think electro-harmonics. They typically use 4 stages of gain, not 3, and crucially, they use silicon transistors, not germanium.
Whoa, silicon. That's a completely different technology and sound.
Totally different. Germanium is warm, compressed, sensitive to temperature, kind of gritty. Silicon is generally higher gain, more stable, clearer, and has a different clipping characteristic. These muff-style circuits give you that big muff sound. Huge saturation, tons of sustain, but often with a pronounced scoop in the mid-range frequencies.
So the Supa and Jumbo tone benders sound like big muffs, not classic tone benders.
Exactly. Think less Jimmy Page MK the Second singing sustain and more towards, say, David Gilmour's muff tones or that general heavy saturated 70s rock sound.
Why would they do that? Keep the name but change the circuit so drastically.
Market trends. By 73, the big muff sound was hugely popular. Players wanted that thick, scooped, high-gain silicon fez sound. Sola Sound, now is Color Sound, basically saw where the market was heading and decided to compete directly with electro-harmonics.
So they built a muff-style circuit.
And slapped the iconic, trusted tone bender name on it, even though the DNA was completely different. It was a strategic move to leverage their brand recognition in a changing market.
That's fascinating and potentially very confusing if you buy one expecting a vintage bender sound.
Oh, absolutely. If you grab a Super Tone Bender expecting spitty germanium fuzz, you'll be shocked. You get 70 silicon saturation instead. It really shows how powerful branding can be, sometimes detached from the actual product specs.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground. From the spitty MKI to the silicon Supa. Let's just quickly recap the sounds one last time, fix them in mind.
Right, MKII. 1965, 3 germanium, very compressed, spitty, aggressive, early Yardbirds.
MK 1.5, Early 66, 2 germanium, simpler, raw ripping, can get gated. Fuzzface ancestor.
MK2 Professional. Late 66, 68, 3 germanium, preamp plus 2-stage core, sandcast case. Thick, loud, famous singing sustain. Page Donovan.
MK3 of Tether Fu, 68 into early 70s.
3 germanium adds tone control. Smoother, more sculptable, often impressed steel case, MK3. Foundational for early 70s UK rock glam.
And then the color sound divergence. Super Jumbo tone benders from 73 onward. Not benders. Silicon, 4-stage, Big Muff family. Saturated, scooped mids, 70s high-gain sound. Think Ronson-era tones sometimes associated with these.
Excellent summary. And the great thing is you don't have to hunt down fragile, expensive vintage units to hear these sounds today, right? There are modern options.
Thankfully, yes. The legacy is alive and well. 2 main paths for faithful recreation stand out. First, Macari's themselves, the original family companies, still operate in London.
And they make reissues.
They do, often collaborating with renowned builders like David Main from DAM, Differential Audio Manifestations. They produce small batch, incredibly faithful recreations of the MKI, MK2, and MK-Phi, often using new old stock NOS germanium transistors. So as close as you can get to the originals.
Pretty much. They're benchmarks for historical accuracy. Built with passion.
Okay, that's the high-end boutique route. What about something more accessible?
There was a really interesting official collaboration a few years back. The Boss TB2W Tone Bender, released in 2021, part of their premium Waza Craft line.
Boss made a tone bender with Sola sound.
Yes, officially sanctioned, working directly with Sola Sound Macari's. It's specifically an MK2 recreation.
And knowing Boss was a craft, it's probably pretty meticulous.
Extremely. They apparently benchmarked it against a particularly great-sounding vintage golden unit. But the really clever part is how they address the germanium fussiness.
Ah, the voltage sensitivity and gating we talked about.
Exactly. Vintage units sound different depending on the battery voltage.
Hmm.
As a battery drains, the voltage sags below 9 volts. This changes the bias point and can create those cool, gated, sputtering sounds, but inconsistently.
So what did Boss do?
The TB2W includes a 3-way switch that lets you select the operating voltage. Standard 9V, or 2 lower settings, like 7V maybe, I forget the exact spec, to deliberately simulate battery sag.
That's smart. So you can dial in that gated dying battery sound reliably.
Precisely. You can get those edgy vintage textures on demand without needing a box full of half-dead batteries. It's a great blend of vintage tone and modern practicality.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the tone bender story, it's more than just fuzz pedals, isn't it? It really mirrors the evolution of rock music itself.
It's a perfect microcosm, yeah. You see the sound evolving circuit by circuit, driven by what players wanted, but also constrained by practical things like component availability. Sourcing good germanium was always a challenge, and then shaped massively by those business deals, the OEM agreements that spread the sound everywhere, often under confusing names.
It really highlights the interplay between technology, artistry, and commerce.
And it leads to a really interesting final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Think about the power of that name, Tone Bender. It was so iconic, so tied to that initial British fuzz explosion, that Sola Sound kept using it for over a decade. They kept it even when the circuit inside changed completely, from 3 germanium to 2 germanium, back to 3 with EQ, and then finally to a totally different silicon Big Muff design.
So the brand outlasted the original technology.
Massively. Which raises a bigger question, really. When does a brand name, that market recognition, become more powerful than the actual engineering, the original DNA of the product itself? At what point were people buying the name Tone Bender rather than the specific circuit?
That's a great question, something to think about, definitely. And hopefully now, when you listen back to those classic 60s and 70s tracks, you can start hearing the differences that MKI Grit, the MK Says Sang, the smoother MK3, or even that 70s color sound scoop.
Yeah, listen closely. The history is right there in the recordings. Thanks for diving deep with us on this one.
It's been fascinating. Until next time, keep exploring.